Welcome to Mastermind Minutes, the leading podcast for franchisors, franchisees, and entrepreneurs of all types. We have one guest, we ask one question, and we get one expert answer, and we do it in minutes, not hours. Good morning and hello again. Welcome to another edition of Mastermind Minutes. My name is Gary Occhiogrosso. I am the founder and managing partner for Franchise Growth Solutions, also the publisher of the Franchise National newsletter. And for those of you, as I say, week after week, here in our seventh season, for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, Mastermind Minutes is a very simple concept. We have a mastermind and we have a couple of minutes, meaning we have one guest, we have one topic or one question, and we try to get through some of that in minutes. We realize that that's, really a short amount of time. So at the end of the program, as we always do, we will make sure you have contact information for the guest and their website and however they want to be reached. Today, my guest is Arif Abdulla, and he is the Vice President of Franchise Development at Nurse Next Door, where he has been a key leader behind the company's global growth for nearly 2 decades. I was just mentioning before the program started, he doesn't look like he's been doing anything for 2 decades, let alone this, but I guarantee you he has. He began his career at 23 and helped scale the organization. I believe he said he started in marketing. We can talk about that. But really from a single location, so from scratch, as I say, to more than 400 locations across North America, the UK, and Australia. So that is pretty exciting stuff. So Arif, before we get into the question, maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and a little bit more about Nurse Next Door so that the audience has an understanding of the concept, and then we can go into the question.
Yeah, you bet. And thanks for having me, Gary. So my name is Arif Abdulla. I'm the VP of Global Franchise Development at Nurse Next Door. So we are a home care franchise system based here in Vancouver, Canada, that operates, as you mentioned, across 4 countries. Our services range from a few hours of companionship all the way through to around-the-clock nursing care, anything you can find essentially in a long-term care facility right within our clients' homes. And our focus is on what we call happier aging, getting people back to doing the things that they love to do as they age, and staying at home for as long as they possibly can. It's been a very meaningful business for me, as you mentioned, over 20 years. In terms of my background, I stumbled across Nurse Next Door at 23 years old when I was coming out of university. And it's funny, I tell the story now. I was quite honestly looking for a job, and I found this very small company that was operating here in Vancouver. There was no franchisees. It was one home care business in Vancouver. And what drew me to the opportunity were all of the things I tell folks not to think about today, right? The financial opportunity, the future potential, the demographics, the sort of sexiness of the industry. And then I remember I started, and for me, I describe this business as easy to fall in love with now. At the time, kind of the impact on people was a nice to have. At 23, I wish I was more altruistic, but it was sort of the nice to have. And then I remember when I started, I went on a client visit to kind of see our business in action. I remember a care designer of ours took me into the home of a client named Mrs. Wong. And I remember walking into her home, and when I walked in, I saw her caregiver, Stephen, doing her hair and makeup. And I asked Stephen what he did with Mrs. Wong every day. And he said, well, I come here, I help her get up and get dressed, and then I make her feel beautiful. And verbatim, that were his words to me. And I realized then the service we were providing was much more than just sort of the support with daily living and the clinical needs we were taking care of. It was a lot more than that. And then I remember it was a few months later, I was sitting at my desk and Stephen walked in, and I asked him, he had tears coming down his face, and I asked him what happened. And he said that Mrs. Wong had passed away. And I realized then just the genuine connection that's created between the client and caregiver and how meaningful it is. So for me, what started as this kind of cool business idea, I quickly realized had this really deep and meaningful impact on people. And those priorities kind of flipped. And so what I thought would be a couple of years of learning and growing turned into 2 decades. And it's a lot of fun what we get to do.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's interesting. Well, it's more than interesting because when I think about that particular business model, yeah, you're really impacting people's lives in a positive way. A lot of at Franchise Growth Solutions, a lot of our brands are restaurant brands, or we do some service brands, but if I'm selling you a cookie or a hamburger, yeah, you're going to feel good about it for a minute, I guess. But when you're doing what you described, I believe you said the caregiver's name was Stephen, when you're doing that sort of a function and you're giving that sort, you're really sort of giving from your soul.
Mhm.
So I could see how that could get to be somewhat emotional if you lose a client, just to the inevitable where eventually someone's going to pass away. So I could see that. It's a very interesting, very, very, very interesting setup, so to speak, that you've given me, because it speaks to really what I wanted to talk about, and that's culture. And I think what you just described is the culture of the caregiver. And I want to talk about the culture of the franchisee and the culture of the company and what you look for, because you've literally taken the company, as I said earlier in the opening, from scratch, from one unit. And I love the way you found it, by the way. It was like that's kind of interesting because I love when things unfold and they're not
Yeah,
targeted. They're just
yeah.
unfold. I love that. But you started there when they had the one unit. Now they've got over 400 units. They're on 3 continents. Sort of taking a concept that way and growing it, the culture from the very early days can sometimes become diluted and sometimes change completely. So how do you manage to scale a company like that without diluting that level of culture that in your business is super important, maybe more important than if you're selling hamburgers? How did you manage to do that?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably talk about this all day long. I think we've been very focused on, excuse me, on culture and scaling culture and
Hmm.
systematizing culture. I think for us, where it begins is ensuring that the culture is rock solid within your own four walls, right? Within your own office, within your own team, because those are the folks. I think about our franchise development team that are out there recruiting, and awarding franchise locations. We have to ensure that they understand, truly believe in the culture, because they're that first connection for prospective franchisees. So that's been really important. We operate, as we've talked about, internationally, we operate under a master model. So making sure we get the right culture fit in those scenarios becomes really critical. I think the second piece of it is really around training, right? And ensuring that we've described and articulated and really built out our culture, that we can find that and train that in our franchisees and in their teams. So one of the things we did early on is we centralized training for all of our caregivers. Thousands of caregivers across 4 continents go through the same culture training that we do here in Vancouver, and so that's been really important. The third thing I would say from a culture perspective is really ensuring you have the operational checks to ensure that culture is coming to life in your market. So, as an example, we centralize our net promoter score system. That all happens from our central office here. So we know our scores in, Melbourne, Australia versus Toronto, Canada versus Los Angeles, California. We can see how that culture is coming to life in each of our markets. So we've spent a lot of time on this. I mean, we have a book out on bold kindness. I mean, it's a whole focus for us.
Hmm. Yeah, and I can see why it needs to be. And I guess where I'd like to go with this is you've been doing this for 20 years, and I don't know if you heard of Scott Greenberg, a friend of mine. He wrote a book called The Wealthy Franchisee. And if you haven't read the book, I would recommend you do. And I would recommend you give it to every one of your franchisees that you award a franchise to, because the book delves into a lot of topics, but he really gets into what differentiates a successful franchisee from one who is not. And
Yeah.
Scott talks about, hey, you and I, we buy the same concept, we go to the same training. If it's bricks and mortar, we open up in the same sort of relatively good location. We got the same product or service. We got the same sign over our door. How come you're successful and I'm not? So I would like to know, and again, because I think so much of what you do is culture based. What are the qualities? What differentiates, I guess, the qualities that a good franchisee has? When I say good, a successful one
Yeah.
from one
Yeah.
who's maybe not as successful. I don't want to say one that's a failure because those are very obvious. But someone who's moderately successful and somebody who's wildly successful. What are the
Mhm.
differentiators there?
Well, I think to your point, I think it does start with that culture core value fit, right? I think we actually look for people that are connected to the industry, that have had personal experience, not necessarily professional experiences in healthcare, but personal experiences. They're driven out of passion for it, because there's going to be difficult times in any business. And if you care about what it is that you're doing, I think you're more willing to do the work, right? But that's the entry point. Those aren't the operational things we look for. Operationally, I'd say it comes down to really three things. Number one, in our business, sales aptitude is so important. Being able to go out there and drive revenue, drive sales. When you think about home care, you don't walk by a storefront and smell the bread and walk in for lunch. It's a business where we have to drive that visibility, because it happens, quite honestly, in the privacy of people's homes, right? And so being visible, not being afraid to talk to people, going into a hospital and talking to a social worker or a discharge planner, those can be daunting conversations for a lot of people. It's the folks that are excited about that and willing to have that sales focus that certainly are more likely to have greater success. The second thing to me is really that leadership ability. We don't want to build a franchise and have it solely rest upon the shoulders of that franchisee, right? We want them to grow and scale and get to a place where that income becomes residual, where they're not required to be in the business every day. And the only way to get there is to ensure that they're able to build and inspire a team around them. And so that leadership ability becomes really important. We train deeply on leadership. And then the last piece, and this is going to sound obvious, but work ethic, right? I think everyone loves the idea of being in business for themselves or becoming a franchisee. And I think people underestimate the work that's involved. And so we're really clear about, this is not a 9 to 5 business. You have support. We have operational systems in place to make sure that it's, reducing that burden. But it's a 24/7 business, and you've got to be willing to put the work into it, particularly the first kind of 15 to 18 months. We really want to set the expectation that probably going to work harder than you've ever worked before, if you've never been an entrepreneur before, I should say, right? And so those are the things that we really screen for early on in our process.
Yeah. And I'll tag on something you said at the end of your statement about working hard that first 15, 18 months, whatever it is.
Mhm.
I started out in the franchising world after I left the radio business in New York, which was like I was totally burned out by age 26. I, for some reason, I opened, when I say for some reason, I opened a Dunkin' Donut shop. And
Oh, okay.
I have no idea why Dunkin' gave a 26-year-old kid with like hair down to here a franchise, but they did. Okay, maybe I was a good salesperson. I don't know. But what I remember was in the beginning, I did not take advantage of or understand the concept of working the system and let the system work the business. I
Right.
grew up sort of in a family of merchants. We weren't really merchants. My family had bakeries. So I saw my dad, my uncles, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, given that opportunity during the Depression, hey, what a great
Mhm.
opportunity. We get to kill ourselves working, okay? But we can put food on the table. So I understand. But for me, that wasn't the case. And when I first launched the franchise with my partner, friend, cousin, I can remember going into my shop on a Sunday or a Monday and not going home
Mm.
until like Thursday,
Wow. Yeah.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
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 And I remember I was working really, really, really hard like crazy hard. And then either my DSM from Duncan or another owner, someone said to me, listen, what you need to do is just follow the system, build your team, have your team take care of these things and inspire them and motivate them. And once we sort of understood that and we started to understand the differences, my mentor, Michael Gerber, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he talks about understanding the difference between the work of the business and the business. And once we understood that difference, then it all started to come together and, we had an easier life. So I agree with you 100%. The culture, you have to be willing to work. Just because you buy a franchise doesn't mean you're going to be an overnight success or that all the business comes to you. You have to go
Yeah.
out. You have to get the business. I mean, that's just the way it is. Um, I just want to shift gears here a little bit. You know, Culturally, obviously, people in Vancouver and in the UK and in Australia are different.
Mhm.
So, did you find it daunting to maybe understand, okay, sort of how people in the UK think differently than us up here in Vancouver, and folks in Australia and have to sort of, I don't know, wiggle the concept a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, when we started in Canada and then we first expanded into the US, and I think it was more about understanding the nuances with the healthcare system and the regulations because it's a different regulatory environment, ensuring we understood that. I think the biggest thing is one of the learnings I had over the years was your success in another country is always under impressive in the country you're looking to expand into, right? So nobody really cared that, quite honestly, nobody really cared that we were successful in Canada when we moved into the US. And when we moved into Australia, nobody really cared that we were successful in North America. Like it kind of plays itself, and rightfully so, right? People want to understand, okay, like, are you going to be successful here? And so that grind to get to the first kind of 10 units is significant, right? You've really got an uphill battle to climb, and it's fun and exciting, but it's work. So in terms of the nuances to each country, what we found is it's understanding what does the brand stand for and ensuring that's consistent country to country, right? We're focused on joyful, happier aging. That's our brand. But that doesn't mean that the business will look exactly the same in every market, right? So for example, when we moved into the US, we saw massive opportunities with supporting the VA, right? And that became a revenue stream that we really built out. In Australia, it was disability services. So we certainly have looked at how do we accommodate each country to sort of optimize the opportunity in that market. So that's been a big kind of learning or focus for us. I think we've gotten better at that over the years. But I think what a lot of brands struggle with is finding that balance, right? You still need to protect your brand. Your brand can't be four different things in four different countries. You have to have a consistent brand. But your operational model, the service delivery, that can evolve based on the operational realities of that market. I mean, even you look at fast food chains and you look at the menus in each country, they do reflect the taste of that market, right? And so how do we take that same concept and reality from a service business perspective?
Yeah, I can see that, and a personal experience there. Many years ago, I was involved with a chicken brand called Ranch One that I had launched with the founders as a franchise, and we had grown it to the point where we actually awarded a master franchise in Taipei, in Taiwan.
Mm.
And what we didn't understand, because I want to kind of bring you into this, what we didn't understand was that the population in Taiwan, by the way, me too, preferred dark meat chicken, chicken
Mm. Mm.
breasts. And here in the US, our whole thing was built on boneless, skinless, white meat chicken breast. Okay. All of a sudden that didn't work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Good example.
So, and again, I don't want to get in the weeds here with you, but I can tell you that trickled down not only from what the consumer was willing to accept, but it trickled down to things that some people always thought were silly, like, a chicken breast is this big and a chicken thigh is this big and our bun was this big. So everything on our operation was built for what we would call bun coverage, and the
Yeah.
chicken thigh just didn't do it. So we didn't anticipate that. So I guess where I'm leading to here is when you get into a new market, especially a new country, like what are some of the things you talked about how you had to change it up a little bit. I would just real quick. I was in a McDonald's in Rome, and it was almost the same. Couple of little things were different, but it was almost the same as a McDonald's here in Brooklyn. But I'm curious to know what were the things that you did that worked, and what were the things that you did, whether it was globally or in a new country that didn't work. And how did you sort of navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think okay, so what worked? I think when we moved into the US, it was really leaning into our brand. I think that market really appreciates the focus of a brand that is really built out. There's a lot of tools and resources and campaigns and systems around it. And so we moved into the US. You see you see the pink wall behind me. Like we're a really bright, vibrant brand. And I think when we moved into the American market, we leaned even more heavily into that, right? Really building up the brand focus of it. And we've done that in every country, is making sure that the brand stands out and gets noticed. I mean, we have pink wrap buses driving around town. People notice us. And as a new franchisor in, say, a new country, you've really got to figure out how are you going to get noticed and stand out. And I know you might not be all that familiar with our industry, but or maybe you are, but it's a competitive industry. There's a lot of players, a lot of independent operators. And so really ensuring that stood out. The other thing for us was making sure that there was an operational difference in the way we operated in that competitive landscape. So the example I'll give you is when we first started franchising, even in Canada, we knew the industry operated under a decentralized model. So each individual franchisee with every competitor is responsible for their own scheduling and operations and logistics. So when a caregiver and client are being matched and scheduled together and managing that relationship ongoing is left to the individual franchisee. It's the hardest part of the business. And so when we launched our franchise concept, we launched it around centralizing that. So we actually take care of that on behalf of the franchisee. And when we went into the US, that was the thing we led with, right? Is here's the operational difference, being able to provide almost a tangible difference beyond the brand to say, this is how we're different than the other folks in the industry. And it attracted a certain franchisee for us, right? And I think that was really important whenever we went into every market is understanding how are we different than those that were already in the competitive landscape. What didn't work? That's a good question. I think it's what I touched on earlier is I think this is me personally. I think I overestimated the success we've had in other markets and that what that would mean in a new market. Nobody cared. Right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
as much as you want them to, and like that's always the thing where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, they don't care that we're successful in Canada or in the US or wherever it might be. And there's ways to leverage it. So we're able to provide case studies and connect people and have validation calls. Like that was great, but you have to really make sure you're coming across as knowledgeable about that particular market.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, growing up when I would get too big for my britches, so to speak, my grandfather, and I could never really say it in Italian, but the translation is overconfidence is ugly.
Yeah.
So so I hear you, and it's interesting because when we in addition to developing franchises, Franchise Growth Solutions is also a franchise sales organization. So we get
Right.
involved in the franchise sales, and we tell our clients who are mostly startups and emerging brands, that's what we specialize in. We
Mhm.
tell them, listen, don't hide the bloody noses. I want to sell the bloody noses. I want to take a potential franchisee and say, hey, our franchisor who's been doing this for 10 years, listen, he got a lot of bloody noses along the way, and the job is to prevent you from
Yeah.
getting those bloody noses. We want to give you a system that we have figured out. And again, to get back to Michael Gerber, who I always refer to as my mentor. I've met him once or twice, but I've read a bunch of his books. He always talks about, and you said about what differentiates you, and he has an expression, this is the way we do it around here. So
Mhm.
yes, you might have many brands in that space, but as far as you're concerned, this is the way you do it around here. And I think that's very, very important. What's your last thoughts on this? Because, my takeaway is you've got to, in your business, you really need to find an operator that is culturally on the same mission mindset, so to speak. And
Mhm.
the system has to be simplistic so that they can inspire a team and build a business from a sales point of view. And then obviously, they have to be in a situation where I don't want to say the business runs itself. That's never happens, but that they could actually implement the system and then perhaps duplicate the efforts somewhere else. That's
Yeah.
my takeaway here. But I'd love to get your last thoughts on this whole concept of cultural fit and franchising.
Yeah, well, I like all of those takeaways. I think those are all good
Yeah.
points.
Yeah.
I think the big thing for me is, find a business you love, right? I think when you find something that is going to give you meaning, and it can be a restaurant business. If, you can make someone's day in a restaurant concept. I mean, you can make family moments and milestones. So I think it's find a business that is going to give you energy and that you're going to love and come at it with the mindset of possibility. I think if you can do that as you get into any franchise concept, it's the starting point for, I think, success in business.
I I love that. Find a business that you love and you'll come out with a mindset of possibilities. Is that what you said?
That's
I
right. Yeah,
think that's what
exactly.
you said. I love that. I'm stealing that, by the way. I will be using that in the future. Let me just tell you, Arif, thank you so much for the time today. I know it's a short amount of time. If someone wanted to reach you or reach out to the company, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, nursenextdoorfranchise.com, easiest way to get a hold of me. Lots of information there. You can contact me directly as well.
Okay, great. And we will embed that in the bio and the captions on YouTube and LinkedIn and everywhere else this thing is broadcast, so to speak. Thank you so much for the time today. It's been an enlightening conversation. It's the type of business that I think a lot of folks don't necessarily think about. We think about restaurants and we think about window cleaning and
Right.
painting, but they don't necessarily think about what you're doing. Um, so I appreciate the time that you've spent with us. It's been enlightening, and I would love to have you back, and we can talk more on another area of this particular business.
Yeah, you bet. Great being here, and thanks for having me.
My pleasure.